Hello and good evening. I'm Paul Settles, head men's tennis coach for CMS. It's so great to be here with all of you tonight. So, our moderators for tonight's special program are Erica Jasper and Ella Brissett. Erica is in her 6th year as Director of Athletics at Claremont-Mudd-Scripps colleges. Prior to CMS, she served in leadership at both the Intercollegiate Tennis Association and for USTA Player Development. After beginning her career as a coach at 4 Division I women's tennis programs. Erica received her undergraduate and master's degrees at Washington State University, where she captained the tennis team and is an inductee into the Washington State Athletics Program Hall of Fame. Ella is a senior at Claremont-McKenna, majoring in biology. She's a team captain, an ITA All-American, and has been part of 2 Athena's NCAA championships teams. Ella founded the Women's Empowerment in Sports Club, which is dedicated to advancing women's representation at CMS and beyond. She's also a Women in Leadership Development Fellow and serves on the CMS Title IX committee. So, you may find our distinguished guest this evening referring to himself as a normie or as a schlub, but his accolades as an elite professional athlete and his unique perspectives on the state of the modern game will suggest otherwise. Andy Roddick's playing career is marked by his 2003 US Open title, the last American male to do so, in addition to reaching 4 other Grand Slam singles finals. He ranked in the top 10 in the world from 2002 to 2010, holding the #1 world ranking for 13 weeks in 2003 and 2004. In 2017, Roddick was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame. While still playing professionally, he established the Andy Roddick Foundation to enhance the educational and economic opportunities for all children based on the principles of respect for family, education, and well-being. His foundation has raised over $10 million since its inception. For his on and off court leadership, Roddick has been the recipient of the Arthur Ashe Humanitarian Award, the Arthur Ashe Prestigious Leadership Award for Urban Health, as well as the Heineken Star Award for contributions to sport and humanity. Since his retirement from playing on tour, Roddick founded and serves the CEO of his own real estate company. Currently, he's a featured contributor on the Tennis Channel and creator and host of Served, an acclaimed podcast with a fresh take on the modern professional game. Please join me in welcoming tennis champion, media personality, and philanthropist Andy Roddick to Scripps College.
Well, thank you, Paul, for the great intro. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Scripps College, for this amazing opportunity. We had a lot of fun back in the green room talking tennis, but I think we've got a really exciting and diverse conversation that hopefully we'll share with you tonight. I'm going to kick it to Ella, who I feel very flattered to be on the stage with tonight. So Ella, go forth.
Thank you. So your bio definitely made this clear, but you had an incredibly consistent career, staying in the top 10 for nearly a decade. So what do you think were maybe some key characteristics that led for such success?
Hi. I'm Andy. It's nice to spend the evening with you all. It's weird because as you're asking that question, my mind is telling me probably not to say what I was thinking, and it was a weird mix of probably ego and insecurity for lots of it. I think when you talk about consistency, I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a series of, it could be 40 decisions a day that all of a sudden you realize you're 20 years into making. I don't really believe much in overnight success. I do think, we are kind of the decisions that we've made at scale over a long period of time. But one of the things that I think was a huge motivator, and I don't know necessarily if it was a healthy one, in this country, and especially when I was growing up, we had so many male American players to look up to, and I certainly felt those shadows all the time. I think it made me better. I think it made me work harder. But I was never going to be, Pete or Andre or any of Arthur Ashe or any of those superheroes. But their shadows, I think, kept me honest, and I think they were probably largely responsible for a lot of the decisions that I made to at least, I lost to the Rodgers and Raffas a lot more than I beat them, but I was able to stick around a little bit longer, I think, just because of the respect I had for kind of the champions before.
Well, and I'll build on that a second, because I feel like as somewhat contemporaries and getting to watch you as about the same age, you brought a level of kind of fitness and intensity to the Pro Tour that hadn't been seen in a while. Talk a little bit about that preparation and how that built into your consistency.
Yeah, I could live with being outplayed. It happened more often than I'd want to admit, but I had this weird thing where I always wondered, and tennis being a global sport, it's not as if you're looking at your neighbor and wondering what their fitness routine is. I always thought about, is someone getting to the track earlier? Is someone, doing something that I'm not doing? I also realized that the people that I wanted to beat were kind of these otherworldly talents, and I wasn't. And so I had to think very pragmatically about how I could go through the process of kind of trimming those margins, knowing that I don't know that I had to be better than them every day for 10 years, but I wanted to continue to give myself shots at the basket so that if the opportunity presented itself, I could be better than them, for one afternoon for 3 or 4 hours. And so my motivators were largely, what the hell is Rafa doing this morning? And I bet it's intense, and I bet it's committed, I bet it's disciplined, and so similarly, I think knowing the types of people that I was trying to beat, I think was a huge motivator.
And I think along those lines, obviously tennis is a pretty brutal sport competitively. You're out there by yourself. You had a lot of amazing wins, a lot of things you probably look back on quite fondly, but a lot of tough losses on the big stage. I think one thing that folks who have admired you over your career is kind of that consistency, intensity. Next tournament you were back, you weren't hanging your head. Can you talk a little bit about kind of maybe how you flipped that switch from tough loss one week to going back out and you've got to play a tough first round the next week, and maybe some of those lessons you could share with our students who are out here today?
Yeah, I think for me, I don't think you have to be in a good mood to go get a track workout in. I don't think everything has to be perfect to get your work in. And so that I think was something I was really good at. I had a heartbreaking loss in 2009 in the Wimbledon final to a guy named Federer, and it was devastating. And for me, it's devastating, but like perspective is also pretty important. People have bigger problems than losing to Roger Federer at the most magical court on earth, in the world. So I think I had that perspective a little bit, but it was just a matter of, okay, you lose on Sunday, a couple days off, the next Thursday comes around. Am I going to feel better about what happened if I'm sitting around my house? My answer was no, and people always work different ways, so what works for me doesn't work. But I was pretty good at spite working out. I was pretty good at getting back to it. Gave myself the space, but it's weird because when I first came on tour and I earned a lot of the, I was pretty polarizing, and I certainly earned that, for better or worse. But I threw things, I said things I shouldn't have said, I threw fits, I was petulant, still am, emotional, still am, but largely better. But it's weird, the worst loss and the most heartbreaking loss of my career, I also feel like was probably the time in my career where people actually saw me as I felt, right? Or as I saw myself. I wasn't this, world-beating talent. I was someone who just worked every day and, almost got it done. But from that match forward, my relationship with the tennis universe changed for the better for the rest of my life. I often wonder, had I won that match, if the relationship would be the same or if I would have been completely unbearable. Or more unbearable.
You existed, though, in the tennis space. Yes, you were competing against the big three or the big four, and being that lone good American at the time and following Sampras, following Agassi, there was a ton of pressure built into that. I think you also had a little bit of a target on your back, whether it was your great play or the fact that you might have been slightly petulant or threw a racket from time to time. We've got a lot of student athletes from both our athletic department at CMS. I see some of the Stags in front. Hi, guys. As well as Pomona Pitzer, some of the best student athletes in the conference, in the country. They feel the pressure of the target on their back in their worlds. Talk a little bit about that and kind of your advice to folks in that, because I think you were one of the best at embracing the target, at least externally.
Well, don't pretend like it doesn't exist. I would be my first thing. Don't pretend like you're trying to get back to a place where there's no target, because once you get to a certain point, it exists. And I don't think ignoring reality is the best way to actually get to a result. And also just go about the work in the exact same way. I think rituals are a huge thing. So there's a lot of noise, and if you're protecting being the best, I think that's a tougher pressure than, I'll use Davis Cup for example. I always felt way more pressure playing home ties than I did playing away, for whatever reason. Whether you don't want to let people down, especially if you're on a team, it's different because you're playing for other people as well. I've always been a big believer in, if you're feeling something, say it. You can't, we were talking about this backstage, but you can't solve a problem that you haven't spoken about. That's an impossibility. And I think kind of culture's catching up to where, if you need to get stronger faster, you can talk about, hey, I need to get stronger faster. If you say, oh, I need to develop a better ritual set so that my pacing during matches is calmer, so that it's slower, so it doesn't mean I have to become a mental giant overnight. There are hacks, right? Maybe I need to play quicker on my own service games and slower. Right? I always like to push the pace if I was serving well, and it was a conscious thought. It wasn't an accident. I was if I'm serving well, I'm going to make them adjust to my pace. So there are little tricks, I think, that you can talk about, and they're almost, I call them beneficial distractions. And I think the more you can kind of lean into those things that are self-serving, it occupies some space and maybe takes away the space of negativity a little bit. But I don't think you can say, well, I'm just going to play like I always did. As reality changes, I think you have to, sorry, that was loud. As reality changes, I think you need to come up with strategies to change with it.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about tennis, but you've also talked about perspective outside of that. And so kind of along those lines, I was wondering, what drives you outside of tennis? What are your passions, and how do you stay connected to them?
Well, there's a lot. Obviously, it starts at home, where I have 2 kids and a wife, so I have the 4th most important opinion daily, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm pretty curious, I think, by nature, so it's nice to kind of be back in the tennis space a little bit, because it's the first thing since I retired that I haven't had to learn from scratch in order to do again. But the foundation has been a massive part of my life. It was a beautiful intro by Paul. We've raised $30 million, not 10. But I often point back to tennis does not get enough credit for the people that have been at the pinnacle of the sport, using that pinnacle to let other people stand on their shoulders as well. If you're talking, we were talking backstage about Billie Jean King, Arthur Ashe, Venus and Serena, the work they've done for literacy. Roger was lead ambassador for UNICEF before he said, okay, I'm just going to go build my own schools. Andre has completely revamped an entire side of Las Vegas. So I think there's a lot of credit in being caught up in the right vacuum. But you also need to be aware of that vacuum, right? Take the good parts out of it, leave the bad parts. And so the foundation's great. Work life is great. I love working. I jump out of bed every morning. I think you have to have something to stride towards. I think it makes your stride a little bit more intentional. So I don't know. I don't know that I'll ever have it all figured out, but I'm certainly curious about what I'll learn tomorrow.
Well, and we wouldn't mind. Can you tell everybody a little bit more about your foundation?
Yeah.
I mean, Paul's players enjoyed that you one-upped him there with the $30 million, but tell us a little bit about the day-to-day there.
Yeah, so it has very little to do with tennis. It's basically education-based learning. We serve 40,000 kids a day in the Central Texas area. It started off at one school, and then it kind of just, the circle grew a little bit bigger. So we have 3 schools of our own, and then we kind of quarterback 40 other. It's all after school and summer learning programs. Summer learning loss is real, especially in lower socioeconomic areas, largely single-parent homes. So 2 things. One, we're adding value to the child, security. I think we started the work before I became a parent. The work became more important to me after I was a parent because I actually understood what was happening. So value add to the kid. We're no longer lagging behind. We're excelling, kind of the more affluent parts of Austin, which is great. If you just defeat that summer learning loss and you're not coming back 20 or 30% behind, by virtue of being around people, working in teams, not having your brain turned off, that really matters. So play it forward. To talk about like the tennis community that we're from, and how it makes things very small. Our first clinic we did, I think we raised like $500, and it was in a parking lot of my school. And now, we were voted the best out of school time and summer program in the country. So I think the biggest thing is we've had a lot of success. You want to keep going further, but also my dad gave me a great piece of advice, and it's worked in this specific venture. Knowing what you know is important. Knowing what you don't is more important. Surround yourself with smart people and ask a lot of questions. Then you won't have to ask the dumb question twice.
I love it. On to new things and asking questions. Your podcast is relatively new. It's been kind of a full and triumphant return to the tennis world for you. Can you share a little bit on kind of how that came about, and then also kind of what you've learned as you've worked through and refined the process?
That's giving me a lot of credit. It was a pretty simple idea. If you picture a tennis broadcast, it's, stuff has changed, technology's gotten better, but you come in and it's 3 people basically parroting each other, right? We all say the same thing in a different way because we have 2 minutes to talk about a match that could last 6 hours, which doesn't seem like enough time to actually break anything down. But it was all centered around live sports rights. And no one in tennis has attacked secondary media. So YouTube, Apple, Spotify, there was no place to just go on a random Tuesday to learn stories, to learn about characters in tennis, to digest it in a 3-minute format, a 20-minute format, or a 2-hour format. And so it seemed like a pretty simple idea. I thought it was going to be a nice hobby. It's become a job, but it's been great. The feedback is phenomenal. I'm amazed people care and/or listen. And now we do more viewers than a lot of the tennis networks weekly. But it kind of speaks to not just doing things the way it's always been done, especially in spaces that are maybe quasi-antiquated sometimes.
Yeah, throughout your podcast, we've been super impressed through your ability to highlight both women's and men's sports, but also maybe the behind-the-scenes players that aren't always in the spotlight. Was that like kind of something that just naturally happened, or was that the goal?
Yeah, we were talking about this backstage. We covered a lot of ground. My producer gets pissed at me because I want to do like the deep dives on characters that don't have like the name value for clicks. That's all I want to do. I want to do like massive 4-hour interviews where only the super nerds care 3 hours in. And then Rafa retires and we have our biggest show ever, and I spend no time prepping and do 20 minutes, and he's right and I'm wrong. But I don't know. I think the value of the format where each segment isn't defined by time, right? I do Tennis Channel Live, and we do a 28-minute show with highlights, and every conversation we have is a minute long, and that's fun, and it's easily digestible, and it's what you want to see if you're trying to like basically digest the entire day and take a shortcut. The pod space, the thing I love about it, even the podcast I listen to, is that it could be 45 minutes or it could be 2 hours, and the conversation is the driver, right? I go in and I have, I write the show about 15 minutes before we go on, because I want it fresh and I want different views, and our team all sits in like a circle and they're just shouting things and I think there's also value in my producer has never done anything in tennis in his life, so what's interesting to him I might not think about because I'm almost too in the weeds. But I like storytelling. I like characters. I like Eric Buderac's journey as a D3 tennis player, versus having Lindsay Davenport on, who's won everything. Where are the commonalities and where are the differences? What are their tennis journeys? How is it different? People like different things, and so the pod has been it's been fun for me because I just basically get to I have an excuse for stealing people's time and learning a little bit more.
Well, and was there a lot of work going into, I feel like in your era on the tour, the men's and women's tours were fairly separate. There wasn't a lot of overlap except for the slams, maybe Indian Wells, Miami, getting to know the women's players and really diving into that space, because I feel like you're one of the few folks in the tennis world who do a really balanced job talking about women's tennis and men's tennis. Was that challenging? Was it? No,
it's exciting.
Yeah.
Amazing athlete is an amazing athlete. And I've been drawn to a lot of the personalities. I love Coco Gauff, and but also how lucky are we in tennis? Whether it's men's or women's, we have citizens like Carlos Alcaraz, who never does anything wrong. After 2 decades of Rafa and Roger never doing anything wrong, and then Coco comes in, and the next dumb thing she says will be the first thing. Will be the first dumb thing she's ever said. We've just been so spoiled with kind of responsible citizens who have, a very human worldview, and I don't know that a lot of sports can say that. And that's been consistent across tennis, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's the individual nature. I don't know if it's the ability to travel young and see different things and experience different places and people, and I think that's probably the best gift that I've ever had.
Yeah, and tennis is pretty special in that sense. It's kind of the vehicle for everything you've experienced in your life. I'm living that dream as well right now in a smaller way. You're very self-effacing even in this conversation. I mean, you tend to downplay your own success and whatnot, and you're pretty honest about your experiences on the court, which tennis can be really lonely and challenging. A lot of moments of self-doubt and criticism, even if it's from point to point or throughout a career. As we are looking, we've got a lot of young people in this room who are maybe struggling with those same doubts, whether it's academically or on the tennis court or on the basketball court or on the baseball field. What are some of your best pieces of advice from your experiences?
Lean into it. The struggle is an opportunity. The struggle just means you're 6 months away from, being stronger, faster, smarter, and then fast forward 20 years and you've had enough of those experiences where, you're able to actually talk about them as well. But also don't be shy about them. And I'm thrilled that, my best friend from tour, Marty Fish, has been very open about whether it's anxiety while playing tennis, which 30 years ago would have been digested and spoken about in probably a pretty demeaning way. Naomi Osaka has been unbelievable. Simone Biles, you had all these jackholes saying that she's not mentally tough. I mean, what are you talking about? If Simone Biles has to fix struggling mentally, and she's one of the best athletes ever, period, there's going to be someone that you can find, that you can source, that you can talk to. There's a coach, there's a mentor. Never ever, we're like narcissists. We like to talk. We like to be the person who can solve your problems. Reach out to people. Honestly, that's human nature. Is we want to be able to help you, and have a factor in a good result. It's just something that's exciting. Coaching, you have a heavy hand in getting a result or having an outcome. So I don't think we're ever going to be the first person to deal with something, and that's awesome, right? That's a big thing. So don't make it a secret.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about like reaching out, like community. What do you think, or who do you think has been the strongest source of community throughout maybe both the tennis world, but outside of it as well?
I always liked kind of having, I think an inside tennis opinion's great. I also think someone who knows you well, who doesn't know kind of your tennis orbit, is also valuable. Andre Agassi was a huge, he was more generous with his time than he should have been with me when I was 17, 18 years old. He got a little quiet when I passed him in the rankings, but it was, but he's someone who, again, someone who is honest about his faults. I don't know if anyone here has read Andre's book, but if you haven't, you're welcome, because you're going to love it. But again, he talks about, like, this is someone who's won 8 Grand Slams, gold medal, is one of the biggest crossover stars that we've ever had, and he wrote a book that was all about his faults, which is fantastic. But I was lucky because I was kind of the one that they were looking at. I had access to my idols, which is a crazy thing to actually experience and live. But I think it's also, it's good to check in with reality and the people that you've known for a long time as well. And I was always pretty conscious about that. I'm annoying because I endlessly ask questions, right? And I think it's served me well, largely.
So probably some of the tennis folks in the room would really like to know the answer to this, because you came up, you played Agassi, you played Sampras, kind of on their exit from pro tennis. You obviously played Djokovic, you played Federer, you played Nadal, you played Murray. Toughest player you've ever played in that group?
Roger. But it's not as if, but then people get mad, like, how can you say that? But then you say Novak's the best ever. I'm like, well, if you had 3 resumes in front of you, the one with the most stuff is probably the one you choose. Feelings aside, but in his prime, it was, because it's all about matchups in tennis too. Like, if I played Rafa on a fast surface, what I did best was what he didn't like, right? I could serve big, he didn't like returning big first serve, so I could kind of control the pacing a little bit. Then we got to neutral, and all of a sudden prayers started for me. But everything I did well, everything that I did well naturally that I didn't have to think about didn't really bother Roger. He accepted pace, and it was annoying to put all the energy into a serve and hit it 140 miles an hour and have someone swing that far and you're neutral. That was soul-sucking. But also we were both good on the same surfaces. So I didn't really run, like, I was never gonna, like, Rafa would see me on clay and he would probably just be like, look to the next round. So we didn't cross over that much. So the equation of having to solve for Roger meant that I was going to have to play outside of my comfort zone for an extended period of time, and we never really played like second, third round. So it was when he was already kind of had it figured out. And I'll tell you, this has nothing to do with the question you asked, but it's hilarious. But just we're talking about like tells and the different levels. So I'd heard a rumor from a former coach of Roger that, like, I felt like he always knew where I was going to serve. No one else ever had a read on my serve, and a read, you toss it a certain way, you can kind of tell where someone's hitting. It's like a pitcher, you can see the way they throw it, and you can get it. So Roger, I always felt like he kind of knew where I was serving, or if I tried to run around a second serve, he would always kind of go the other way and pull the string, and forever I was just like, this guy is, it was a problem. And so I heard that one of his former coaches got a little loose-lipped. He was drinking a beer and said that apparently when I was going to run around, I lifted my head up like an inch. And if you know Roger, he kind of keeps his eyes on someone very long, and then he does this like dramatic little flip before he serves. So he was like keeping eyes on his opponents, like reading the way that they split stepped. And so when I would lift up, if I was taking on the back inside, I would stay down and lean in, and if I was about to run around it, I would kind of pop up. And so I say I spent I spent 10 years only losing to Roger, and then the last year of my career, I only beat him. So we played at Madison Square Garden, and I didn't do that, and it ended well. And then we played in Miami, and we're in a third set, and same thing. I was able to stay down, and I ran around and gave one a ride, and ended up beating him. And so we're on a switchover. It's like 3-2 in the third set, and we're walking by each other, and he kind of puts it under his towel so mics can't hear. And he knew that I had kind of finally like clicked, and he goes, "It took you long enough." Thank you.
That's a stellar story.
Yeah.
All right, we've got some fun ones for you to finish up before we open up the audience. If you couldn't be a pro tennis player, what sport would you play?
I don't know, baseball. I was pretty, hit different type of ball with a different type of thing. I don't know.
This might be controversial, but pickleball is becoming very popular on campus. What is your opinion on pickleball, and what do you see for the future of the sport?
I like it like I like all other barbecue games. I think it's fine. Like, I think it's great. I think it's insane when tennis people get worked up and are like actively threatened by this thing that's like you hit it. Someone made this game up like 10 minutes ago. I know they say it was like from the 50s. That was like it was like two drunk guys. He was like, "Look at this! I'm gonna hit the wiffle ball." It's fun. It's easy. It's not intimidating. I think there's plenty of room in the sandbox. My son did not want to play tennis. My daughter would be on one court taking a tennis lesson. My son would be on the next court playing pickleball. So he does that for 6 months. And it's like, I can't tell him how ridiculous it is, because he's a kid. His coach, pickleball coach, was the... My dad was a farmer from Wisconsin. He would be ashamed of me right now. Anyway, so doesn't show up one day, and then Hank's my son, he goes over and starts playing tennis. And because he had kind of learned where the paddle face was, all of a sudden tennis made sense to him a little bit longer. But there is just no world where you can go to the US Open, watch a night session, watch the athleticism, and if you leave that arena feeling threatened by pickleball, there's a problem. Like, it's unwatchable. It's unwatchable, and it's like weirdly it's like the opposite of every other sport, because the higher level it is, the worse it is on TV. Because all you're doing is trying to stay out of trouble. Like, for us schmucks, it's like maybe kind of entertaining because we just want to get to the hitting, so maybe it's better on TV, but it's fine. It's a fun little game. We give it too much credit. Yeah, it's like the real estate works. You can fit 3 pickleball courts, 12 bodies, club level, great. Perfect.
You
it's
just
great
lost
for
half the crowd.
Yeah, it's been like a huge win for orthopedic surgeons. It's great. Perfect. Yeah. I see people going, mm-hmm.
They came tonight. They actually sponsored the talk.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
All right, not as controversial, but was in the 90s. Visor or hat?
What was what now?
Visor or hat?
Oh, well. I feel like visor was great. I think I took it for granted because I thought I was going to have hair forever. But I think hat. I think it was Brad Gilbert made me ditch the visor. It was a rough one. He was like, I'm not coaching someone who wears a visor. I was like, oh, it could have been so great. Yeah, but there was no turning back. He made me get rid of it, and that was that.
You mentioned it. You're pretty intellectually curious. You've stayed really active. Ella and I spent some time with you, obviously, in the green room. I think you'd be a great college student if you were going to go to college. Where would you go? And what would you study?
Other than here.
Do what?
Other than here.
Yeah. I would have gone, my brother was the assistant coach at Georgia when I had to make that decision, so I probably would have gone to Georgia. But like him, I probably would not have made it out of college at that moment in time. I honestly have no idea, because it's hard to look back at, the 17-year-old version of yourself and say, I would have done this. I honestly have no idea. I'm happy that I didn't have to make that decision, because it might have been the wrong one, but I probably would have gone to Georgia.
And what would you have studied?
I would have tried not to. That's what I'm supposed to say here, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I honestly don't. I'm a massive fan of history, so it would have been that offset between what am I really interested in versus what can I use after this, and I don't know what that answer would have been.
Yeah, if you major in history, you become an athletic director, so it's
Great.
It's fast track.
Perfect.
You got a last question for Andy
Yes.
before we turn it over to the audience?
It's maybe a deeper question, but
Like Barbara Walters here.
outside of tennis, what do you want your legacy to be, or how do you want to be remembered?
I don't know. I don't think we're great at being objective about ourselves. Hopefully it is some sort of cross-section between hard work and kindness. There's probably some bumps in the road, extremely flawed, but hopefully constantly like striving towards progress. But I honestly have no idea. I don't. It's not something I think about. I don't really think about old matches. I don't think about past often. I kind of think about next week a lot.
Andy, thanks so much for answering Ella's
Cheers.
Barbara Walters
Easy.
questions.